Sup you beautiful people. Hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome back to another new episode of What If Naruto was Shinobi Ashikabi. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So now let's start this video. Much like the last time Naruto had been inside of Hamura's room, Akitsu had at some point realized where he was, and decided to sit in the hallways just outside of the room to wait for him. Unlike last time, the ice user wasn't alone. Both Musubi and Kusano were also there. The green girl was laying on her stomach, feet kicking in the air childishly as she drew on a sheet of paper with a set of crayons. Sitting against the wall with her legs spread out before her was Musubi. The fist fighter had her eyes closed as she leaned back and hummed a happy tune. Naruto couldn't help but wonder about how long these three were out here. Had they come here straight from the bathhouse? The moment he had stepped through the door and into the hall, the three Sekirei took notice of him. Akitsu shifted, her chains rattling as placed a single hand on the floor, her touch light with only the tips of her fingers actually touching the wooden tiles. With a slow grace she stood up, the chains wrapped around her once more, making their chinking sounds as they rattled and shook together. Without a word she moved over to stand by him in her usual spot. Kusano reacted about as could be expected. She scrambled to her feet, almost tripping in her excitement as she stood up. Her left hand came down to the floor as she snatched the drawing from the ground, and made her way over to him, leaving the crayons where they were on the floor. Naruto made a note to himself that he would need to remind the little sprite that she needed to pick up after herself, and not leave her things on the floor for people to trip over. Naruto-sama. Musubi's exclamation of excitement brought the blonde's gaze over to her. She retracted her legs, bringing them underneath her from their splayed-out position, before placing both hands on the ground and lifting herself off the floor. She quickly hopped over to him, stopping directly on his right and clasping both hands in front of her, the act causing her arms to squeeze her breasts together, and had the effect of drawing Naruto's eyes to them. "How's Kagari-san? Is he okay?" With a bit of effort, Naruto drew his eyes away from the delightful sight of his first Sekirei's bosom. It really was quite difficult. His Sekirei were easily some of the most beautiful women he had ever laid eyes on, and Naruto, well, he wasn't a pervert in the same way other men were, but he was still a guy. One also had to consider the fact that his body was still that of an 18-year-old, which pretty much meant he was a walking hormone. Sometimes it sucked being stuck in the height of puberty. "Hamura is fine," he reassured her with a smile. His words seemed to cause her some confusion, however, with the fist fighter tilting her head to the side and looking at him with blinking eyes. "Hamura?" Musubi asked, pressing her right finger against her lower lip as she looked at him in confusion. "Who's that?" Naruto opened his mouth to ask her how it was possible that she didn't know of the only other male in Maison Izuma when he paused. Oh yeah, Musubi didn't know about Hamura's true identity, did she? Even when they had teamed up with the fire user, Hamura had never given his name, and all she knew him as was Kagari, since that was the alias he went under while here. With that in mind, Naruto sighed and said, "Hamura is Kagari." When all Musubi did was blink in a befuddled fashion, the blonde decided to elaborate. "Kagari is the alias Hamura goes under here. His real name is Hamura." "Oh?" Musubi's eyes lit up in understanding, and she smashed the fist of her right hand in her open left palm. "I see," she said with a nod, then she blinked. "So if Kagari is Hamura, then who is Hamura?" If it wasn't for the fact that Naruto had gotten so used to Musubi's cluelessness, he probably would have face-palmed. As it was, all he did was sigh. "You probably don't remember since I don't think I ever gave you my name," Hamura said as he appeared from behind Naruto. Musubi blinked as she looked over at the fire user who had just seemingly appeared out of nowhere from her perspective. The silver-haired Sekirei continued without pause. "However, I was the one who helped you three when you rescued Kusano at the Arboretum." Musubi looked at the silver-haired male with breasts some more, before her eyes lit up once again. "So that man really was Kagari-san?" she crowed, nodding her head as if everything now made sense. "At first I didn't think it was him, because that guy was wearing a mask, and Kagari-san doesn't." Kagari's right eye began to twitch. "It's Hamura," he corrected the fist fighter. Naruto's lips twitched as he watched Hamura try to deal with Musubi's air-headed nature, all the while getting more and more frustrated by the girl's seeming inability to understand what the fire user was trying to tell her, when a tug at his left pant leg caused him to look down. The one tugging on his clothing was Kusano. The little Sekirei was staring at him with her bright green eyes, and from the annoyed look on her face, she had probably been trying to get his attention for a while now. Once his eyes were focused on her, however, the green girl quickly held out the piece of paper she had been drawing on. Wani-chan. Look at what Ku-chan drew. Amused, Naruto took a look at the drawing in the little girl's hands. It was the kind of drawing one would expect from a girl as young as Kusano. 4 stick figures lined up in a row with large smiley faces, all holding hands. The one in the middle was obvious him, judging from the bright yellow spikes on its head. The one on his immediate left was Kusano, seeing as how that figure was the smallest, and had the same bright yellow color to its hair, though rather than being spiky it was squiggly and long, flowing all the way down to the figure's legs. Kusano was holding Musubi's hand, at least he was positive it was Musubu, judging by the brown hair color, the single strand of hair that seemed to defy gravity, and the bright pink gloves on its hand. On Naruto's right was Akitsu, the hair color being a strange combination of blue and yellow, obviously the girl trying to make the lighter tint that made up the ice user's hair. There was also the fact that the one on his right had chains, which made Naruto sweat drop lightly and wonder if perhaps he should try and get the snow woman to wear them less, so Kusano wouldn't be epis to them so much. The 4 stick figures were standing on a green line, which the blonde interpreted as grass, and above their heads in the far left corner was a yellow circle with a smiley face, obviously the sun. Naruto smiled as he crouched down and looked at the tiny girl. That's an excellent drawing, Ku-chan, he said, placing a hand on the girl's head and gently patting her hair. You're a really amazing artist. Kusano beamed at him, before running into his personal space and clinging to him like a limpet. With her arms around his neck, the small girl planted a kiss on his cheek, her happiness infectious as the blonde lifted her up when he stood again. So you're Hamura, but you're also Kagari? Musubi continued asking, her need for clarification apparent. Yes, Hamura sighed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Really, how hard was it to understand what he was trying to say? This wasn't rocket science. Gotcha. Musubi bumped the fist of one hand into the palm of another, signifying her understanding. So Hamura's real name is Hamura, but you call yourself Kagari. That's right, Hamura nodded as he released an exhale of relief, pleased that Musubi finally seemed to understand what he was saying. I don't get it. Hamura face palmed at the fist fighter's words. It seemed he had spoken too soon. Musubi frowned, her nose scrunching up cutely in thought. Why would you need to call yourself Kagari if your real name is Hamura? It was quite clear that she just didn't understand the need for an alias. In fact, Naruto was quite sure the girl didn't even know what an alias was. The sound of palm-slapping face resounded in the hall as Hamura tried to control his irritation. I called myself Kagari because I needed a name for the people I work with and my customers to call me. His voice sounded pretty frustrated, and the blonde shinobi could almost picture steam rising from the man's head as his anger rose. However, I don't want people who aren't a part of the Sekirei clan to know my real name, since it's supposed to be a secret from the average citizen. So I needed to come up with a proper alias, hence the name Kagari. Oh? Musubi nodded in realization, once more doing the fist in palm, that seemed to be becoming more used by her. However, a second later the girl proved that she still didn't understand something when she tilted her head and asked, what's an alias? Her question had Hamura releasing a strangled cry of frustration as he grabbed fistfuls of his hair. Seeing as the fire user's patience was being slowly eroded, Naruto decided it may be best if he interrupted the pair, before his new Sekirei could get any angrier. An alias is a false name to conceal one's identity, Musubi-chan, the blonde answered for the ever-increasing in frustration Hamura. When the excitable fist fighter turned to him and tilted her head, he sighed. Normally, people who don't want others to know who they are come up with fake identities in order to remain incognito. Musubi blinked. Incognito? What's that? In a strange form of synchronicity, Naruto and Hamura both palmed their face in inspiration. It's... Why don't I tell you while we're making lunch? Naruto offered. It's nearing lunchtime and I don't know about you, but I'm getting pretty hungry. In response to his mentioning of lunch and hunger, Musubi's stomach began to roar with the same ferocity of a dinosaur. As the fist fighter looked down at her rumbling tummy, Naruto gave a nod. So who wants to help me cook lunch? Asked Naruto, deciding to see if he could involve his Sekirei in the task. It was only right that he allowed them to be with him, seeing as how he was their Ashikabi. Right. Oh, I want to help you, Naruto-sama. Musubi appeared almost immediately after he had spoken, throwing her hands in the air above her head, as if trying to emphasize her point even more. Still attached to his neck like a limpet, Kusano nodded her head while giving her usual MHM noise. Akitsu blinked, then nodded. Me too. Hamura. Naruto said, looking at the newest member of his flock, because there was no way he was going to call this a harem anymore when one of its members had a penis. Do you want to help in the kitchen? Actually, I think I'll stay out of this, Hamura told him. I've never been that good at cooking, he admitted while looking rather sheepish. Considering you've probably had me cooking for you for the majority of time you've been released from the labs, I'm not surprised, Naruto said, taking quick note of Hamura's frown when he spoke Mia's name without the Chan-suffix like he usually did. That's right, he was going to have to update the fire user on what's been happening recently, including his spat with the landlady. But that was for another time, like when they could speak privately. Why don't you just sit tight then while we whip up some food? Hamura looked at him for a second, before shrugging and offering a small smile. Sounds good to me, he said as Naruto lifted Kusano above his head and set her on his shoulders. The group made their way down the hall and towards the kitchen, with Hamura separated from the others after reaching the entrance to the dining room. As the group 4 entered the kitchen, Yusubi turned an expectant look towards Naruto. So are you going to tell me what incognito means now, Naruto-sama? She asked with an impression of anticipation. Naruto just sighed. Nope, he just couldn't get a break. Cooking lunch, usually a task that took no more than 15 minutes to half an hour depending on what you make, ended up being a very extravagant affair that took quite a bit longer than half an hour to accomplish. Much like the times when Naruto's Sekirei take to the task of helping him clean the dishes, it took nearly twice the amount of time, around an hour, to make what would normally have been a simple lunch of onigiri with several side dishes that consisted of boiled shrimp, sweet potatoes, and pickled vegetables. A part of the problem may have been Akitsu. In fact, Naruto was sure that the snow woman was the reason the meal took so long. He had given her the job of washing and peeling the potatoes, a job that she took to with the same slowness that she did everything else sans combat. The light-haired ice user seemed intent on doing things in methodical manner that stretched the entire 1-minute process to that of a snail's pace. She would grab each potato one by one, stare at it for no less than 60 seconds, peel it, rinse it under the tap for even longer, then set it aside to be cooked in sake. It was a ludicrously slow process, but one that Naruto could not find it in himself to complain about. While Akitsu was peeling potatoes, Musubi was working the stove. Thanks to her ability to make curry, the fist-type Sekirei was, thankfully, well-versed in cooking over a stove with pots and pans, though Naruto did have to give her directions on what to do. The child-hearted Sekirei with the busty figure had to keep track 2 pots, one for the potatoes, and another for the boiled shrimp. The bustiest of his group seemed to be quite content, humming a little tune to herself as she occasionally stirred the contents of each pot. The only one of his flock who was not doing as much was Kusano, as he did not want the girl to make a big mess or hurt herself via burning her hand on the stove. That was not to say that he had her doing nothing. In an effort to include the littlest of his group, and to not get his leg chomped on by the girl's sharp incisors, Naruto had the girl help him make the onigiri. Thankfully this seemed to suit the tiny blonde just fine. As a matter of fact, she seemed ornately pleased to be working so closely with her Wani-chan. She was also making a mess, getting rice and sauce from the umabashi all over the place, including but not limited to the table, the floor, her face, hair and clothes, and on Naruto as well. Not that the much older blonde could find it in himself to complain or scold the girl. If anything, he was having just as much fun as she was due to a combination of having not acted like a child in, well, a long time, and the bond working its magic by sending Kusano's feeling over to him. By the time they were done, Naruto was positive they had wasted just as much rice as they had used, though he was pleased with the results. Rather than go the traditional route of making balls, triangles, or squares, they had decided to go with more elaborate shapes. Kusano had made several stars, a moon complete with dotted craters, though Kusano may have just been saying that to cover up her mistake, and hearts. Naruto had decided to be a bit more elaborate, and had actually made his onigiri into the faces of the tenants of Maison Izumo. It actually reminded him of the time Hinata had made him some onigiri in the shape of his own face, which at the time Naruto had thought quite creepy, since he had not known of the shy Haika's crush on him. He wondered if his housemates would feel the same way he had back then. Alright, Ku-chan, Naruto said as they finished putting the intricately shaped rice balls filled with umabashi onto a serving tray. Time for us to get cleaned up. Emu Kusano pouted as she looked at him, her covered in rice and plum sauce, face scrunched up in a glare. It was actually quite adorable, and were Naruto a female, this would have most definitely been the moment where he kawaiied and snuggled the girl into his bosom. Since he wasn't a woman and didn't have breasts, he did none of those things, though he did get the amusing image of Hamura doing just that for a second before dispelling the thought. He didn't want to make himself look like a fool by falling on the floor and laughing for reasons only he knew. Kuchan doesn't need to be cleaned, she already took a bath this morning. Ah yes, Naruto had almost forgotten that children her age didn't really like taking baths. It was anathema to them. Fortunately for you, you don't need to take a bath, Naruto told the girl. We just need to wash our hands and wipe your face off, it's covered in rice and plum sauce. Okay, Naruto sighed in relief that the tiny titan seemed to calm down. Grinning, he lifted the green girl into his arms, eliciting a squeal of excitement from the child Sekirei, and began walking towards the sink where Kitsu had just finished peeling the last potato. Akitsu-chan, would you mind leaving the faucet on? Asked Naruto as he saw the ice user move to turn off the faucet. The woman slowly turned and looked at the pair of rice-covered individuals from head to toe. After a second of observing them, she nodded. Okay, she said, stepping aside and allowing the two to move in. Using his shinobi-granted dexterity, Naruto's left foot shot out, catching the stool that stood next to the sink, and hucking it with his toes. He pulled, bringing it in front of him and setting the girl down on it. Reaching over Kusano's head, Naruto squirted several shots of foamy soap from the small bottle of hand soap that sat next to the bottle of dish soap, and then, much to Kusano's protest, began helping the girl wash her hands. Winnie-chan, Ku-chan knows how to wash her hands. The little girl grumbled and complained as Naruto rubbed her hands in between his, making sure that all of the plum sauce was off her fingers. Perhaps, Naruto said with a teasing grin that the little sprite couldn't see due to him being behind her. But I also have to wash my hands, you know. Better to just do them at the same time, I say. He looked over at Akitsu, who was watching the proceedings almost curiously, or maybe she was just staring at him, both were very likely, and gave her a quick wink. Despite the fact that her face didn't change, Naruto almost thought he saw her lips twitch. Kusano continued to complain and grumble, though Naruto knew she actually enjoyed him helping her wash up. Kids always complained simply for the sake of complaining. Over where she was still making sure the food boiling in the pots were being cooked, Musubi giggled at the sight. That looks like fun, she commented. We're having loads of fun, Naruto said brightly before looking down at Kusano. Isn't that right, Ku-chan? Oni-chan no baka, Kusano mumbled, more to herself than to him, though Naruto heard it all the same. Ku-chan knows how to wash her own hands. Rather than feel indignant at the green girl's words, which he would have felt if he was still the naive genin he used to be several thousand years ago, the blonde couldn't help but find amusement in the whole situation. Was this what it meant to let someone into his heart? He wondered. These feelings of joy, contentment, and happiness. For the past few days, since he had realized how dangerous the winging process was to his emotions, Naruto had kept his distance as much as possible. It hadn't quite worked out as well as he had hoped, but he had done his best to not let his Sekirei get too close to him. But now, this was the first time he had allowed himself to truly let go since that day he had realized the danger about the bond between Ashikabi and Sekirei, and he had to admit, it felt nice. He rather liked the simple emotions he was able to experience by being with his Sekirei. If this was what he had to look forward to every day, even if it wasn't permanent, maybe letting them into his heart really was worth it. Naruto decided to not respond to the obstinate little girl's words. With a slight smile, he grabbed one of the towels hanging on a rack by the sink and dried off his hands, then helped Kusano dry hers. He ignored her complaints as well. When he was done, the tiny blonde tried to hop off the stool, but Naruto was quick to catch her and set her back on it. He said, wagging his finger at the pouting child. We may have washed your hands, but we still have to get all the rice and plum sauce off your face, your hair, and your dress. The little girl just glared at him, her throat emitting the phew noise he was beginning to associate with anger. Not that he was going to let that bother him. You don't want to go to the table looking like a slob, do you? He asked as he grabbed a small rag and soaked it in the still running water. As he wrung the rag out, his eyes looked over towards Akitsu, who was standing off to the side as she stared at him. Akitsu-chan, he called, getting the ice user to perk up. Would you mind coming here and helping me clean off Ku-chan? Akitsu cocked her head to the side, then nodded. Of course, Ashikabi-sama, she said as she began making her way over to the pair of blondes. Naruto gave her the rag he had wrung out and directed her to begin wiping down Kusano's face, while he began getting the rice out of the girl's hair. Aki-chan. Kusano whined as the snow woman began to slowly and gently wipe off the plum sauce and rice that was caked to the girl's face. Ku-chan can do herself. Ku-chan knows how to clean her face. Ashikabi-sama's orders are absolute, the light-haired Sekirei told the tiny titan, not at all bothered by the growl said child unleashed as she continued her cleaning. Musubi looked over from where she was. It looked like the potatoes and shrimp had just finished cooking as she had turned off the stove, and gained an excited smile at seeing the other 3 people in the room, looking like they were having so much fun. "Can I help, Naruto-sama?" she asked, skipping over to the trio and stopping just a few inches short of them, her hands clasping themselves together in front of her body. "Sure," Naruto said, taking his attention away from his attempts at removing a particularly stubborn stain on the hem of the little blonde's dress, to grab another washcloth and hand it off to Musubi, who had skipped over to him. He was really glad Kusano had decided not to wear her wagtail costume, or these stains would be much harder to remove. "I got all of the rice off her already, but I need some help cleaning off these plum sauce stains." "Got it," Musubi said, pounding a fist into the hand holding the wet and soapy washcloth. Consequently, this had the effect of splattering everyone with soapy water. Of course, the moment Naruto got wet, he simply had to retaliate himself by re-wetting his washcloth, and using it to flick water on everyone else. It wasn't long before Kusano ended up getting into the fight by grabbing the removable faucet and spraying everyone in the vicinity. Soon enough, the kitchen was alight with excited squeals, loud giggling, and the first honest-to-God laugh Naruto had ever let out in years. The only person who did not partake was Akitsu, who was still trying to focus on cleaning the now waterlogged Kusano. Akitsu started as she was sprayed in the face with the faucet. Stop. Needless to say, her words had no effect. Up above the entire fight, watching from her hidden spot in the rafters of the ceiling, Natsu quietly giggled into her hand. "It's a soap opera. A soap opera." It was nearly half an hour after the random water fight that a still slightly wet Akitsu, Kusano, Musubi, and Naruto emerged from the kitchen carrying the food they had prepared. Thankfully the group had managed to keep their battle localized, and thus saved the food from getting sopping wet and ruined. "Heh, you guys sure sounded like you were having a lot of fun in there," Uzume said with a chuckle. She was sitting down at her usual spot, her legs splayed out before her, arms back to act as support, and an easygoing smile on her face. Naruto could still see a bit of tension in her posture, and correctly assumed it was due to her Ashikabi still being in Higa's clutches, but ever since the conversation they had yesterday, Uzume seemed to be in a much better mood. It was almost unnoticeable, but to those who were observant enough, it looked like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Jealous that you didn't get to join in, Uzume-chan?" asked Naruto began setting down the plates. Following right behind the taller blonde, Kusano began placing the chopsticks and napkins she had been carrying net to the plates. Akitsu and Musubi both set down the large serving trays they had been carrying. Musubi had the boiled shrimp and potatoes, while Akitsu was carrying the onigiri, in the center of the table, so everyone could reach the food. Maybe, Uzume admitted with a wink and a grin. "Inviting me to join you guys that time?" she asked, leering at Musubi whose still wet shrine maiden shirt was clinging to her form like a second skin. A soaking wet second skin that showed off her slightly hardened nipples. "I think you just want to see me get all wet, so that my clothes cling to my skin and become partially see-through." Naruto stood back up and took his chin into his left hand, as he eyed the busty Sekirei in the star shirt up and down. "Maybe," he admitted shamelessly, causing Uzume to actually gape at him. The blonde quickly hid his smirk by turning around. That would teach her not to mess with Uzumaki Naruto. Phew. Did someone say something about getting wet? Everyone in the room blinked at the sound of the voice coming from the ceiling. Looking up they all saw Matsu looking down on all of them from her spot hidden within the ceiling. Naruto couldn't help but wonder about how she got up there, but eventually decided he just didn't want to know. With a shake of his head, Naruto called her down. "Matsu, get down from there." "Yep, just like that." Matsu was quick to follow his instructions, turning around and lowering her body down the hole in the ceiling she had made by removing the panel, as she gripped the edge of the ceiling. She dangled for a second before letting go and dropping to the floor. Being a Sekirei whose strength was not in combat, the redhead did stumble a bit, but quickly managed to right herself. "Spying on me again, Matsu-chan?" asked Naruto with a raised eyebrow. Matsu froze, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in the headlights. "Sorry," she apologized, squirming a bit uncomfortably. Hamura raised an eyebrow at the way Matsu was acting, but didn't comment. "It's fine," Naruto said with a shake of his head. "I didn't ask you to take your cameras down in the kitchen." It was his way of telling Natsu that she was allowed to peep on certain places in the house, so long as they were not areas where doing so would be considered an invasion of privacy, like say, the bathroom and bedrooms. Speaking of, I think I've got an idea on what we should do with those spy cameras. Oh? Natsu looked at Naruto curiously. He didn't know if the redhead had gone into all of the rooms and removed the cameras already, but figured since she had taken them down in Hamura's room this morning, most likely had. He would do a sweep later on just to make sure. How good are you at creating programs and the like? He asked, making Natsu frown in thought. I like to think I'm pretty good, Natsu admitted. Though I don't go around making computer programs very often. She shrugged before looking at him thoughtfully. So what kind of programs are you thinking about? And what does it have to do with the cameras? Well, I was thinking of using the spy cameras to form a perimeter around the house. Naruto tapped his chin for a moment. If we could set up a perimeter around the house, and connect the cameras to a program that will alert us whenever a Sekirei that doesn't live in Maze Izumo comes near. Think of it as an alert system, so that we can be prepared in case someone with possible hostile intentions comes knocking. That's... Natsu blinked several times as she tried to put her thoughts into words. All around the table, those who understood the implication the blonde's words had also had similar impressions of shock on their features. Naruto probably should have impacted it, but the redhead was the first to recover her voice and give her thoughts on his words. Her reaction was a bit enthusiastic. That's brilliant, she crowed, jumping on a startled Naruto, who was forced to take a step back to steady himself as she wrapped her legs around his waist and her arms around his neck. I don't know why I didn't think of doing that. It would have made several incidents that happened in the past much easier to deal with. Maybe you didn't think of it because you were too busy trying to come up with more and more perverse ways of peeping on people while they bathed, Naruto said with a grunt. Natsu pouted at him, but the blonde paid no attention to it as the girl began slipping down his wet clothes. In an effort to keep the girl from falling off him, the blonde had to place his arms under her bum, gripping her twin cheeks, and making the girl give him a coquettish grin. "Now you really are wet, aren't you, Naruto-tan?" she said, looking like the cat that got the cream. Natsu then began rubbing herself against his body, cutting most of the blood flow from Naruto's brain to another part of his anatomy. "Maybe I should help you dry off," she suggested with a grin that said she knew of the effect she was having on him. Naruto began to feel lightheaded as he tried to figure out what he should do in a situation like this. Normally it would be easy, bend the girl over the table and have his way with her. Unfortunately, it wasn't that easy this time. Aside from the fact that there were currently more than just him and Natsu in the room, the redhead rubbing against him wasn't some fling or one-night stand, she was his Sekirei. Would it even be right if he did something of a similar nature with one of his Sekirei, when they had only known each other for 2 days? As Naruto was struggling to quell both his internal debate and his physical reaction to an attractive young woman rubbing herself all over him, the voice of his littlest Sekirei helped end both of those arguments. Winnie-chan, what are you and Ma-chan doing?" asked the little girl with an innocence only she could possess, her eyes wide and curious as she stared at the two. "It looks really fun. Can Ku-chan do that with you and Ma-chan too?" Screw dumping a bucket of cold water on him. This was like throwing him into the freezing ass water of Antarctica. "Not in front of Ku," Naruto said to Natsu, releasing his hold on the girl and forcing her to set her feet down, lest they slide off him and she end up falling, which would have happened, since the net thing to go were her arms around his neck. She gave him a pout, but the blonde just pointed his finger at the table, a silent gesture that was easily interpreted. With a huff and more pouting, Natsu made her way over to one end of the table, plopping herself down and crossing her arms in desperation. "So just why are you all so wet anyways?" asked Hamura, eyeing the group as he finally decided to speak. The fire-using male with breasts was sitting next to Uzumaki, his legs crossed under the table, and his forearms resting against the wooden object. Naruto took quick notice of the silver-haired Sekirei, and saw that he had changed clothes sometime during the blonde's cooking and ensuing water fight with his other Sekirei. "We had a water fight," Uzumaki crowed, throwing her hands up in the air, while Naruto took a seat at the table on the opposite end of Hamura. Before the fistfight could come back down from her excitement, both Akitsu and Kusano managed to sit down on either side of him, making the excitable brunette pout when she realized both spots net to her Ashikabi had been taken. She quickly sat down net to Kusano as Uzumaki turned her eyes on Naruto once more. "So," she said, trailing off as a sly grin corked her lips. Naruto eyed the busty young woman with a raised brow, waiting for the girl to continue. "I noticed something interesting about Hamura here," she said, eyeing the man's chest. Hamura had used traps to bind his chest, but even though it did a decent job of hiding Hamura's newly acquired assets, it couldn't quite make the two lumps unnoticeable. The fire user glared at Uzumaki, a blush on his face as he tried to cover his chest. The star-shirted Sekirei ignored the glare, however, as she turned to leer at Naruto. Is there something going on between the two of you that I should know about? Naruto looked over at Hamura, who noticed his gaze and sent the blonde a pleading look, even as he held his arms against his chest. It was very obvious what the fire user wanted, and Naruto could understand why Hamura didn't want Uzumaki, or anyone for that matter, knowing that he had been winged by a guy. Unfortunately, while Naruto himself had no trouble keeping that particular secret from Uzumaki, there was another in the room who already knew and was well known for her lack of discretion. Ah. Hamura was just winged by Naruto-sama. Usubi told the tomboyish Sekirei with an innocent smile, quite obviously having no clue what she had just done. Indeed, if anything, she seemed to be so caught up in the happiness of Naruto, adding another Sekirei to his flock, that she remained heedless of everything else. Isn't great. Heh, so you got another, eh bro? Said Uzumaki with a grin as she eyed the now had buried in his hands Hamura. I didn't know you two swung that way. Swung? Usubi asked, tilting her head to the side in curiosity. Does Naruto-sama have a swing? Her question went unanswered. Not only did no one wish to spend the time answering a question like that, there were far more important things to pay attention to. Like the reaction Naruto and Hamura had to Uzumaki's words. We don't. The two said in unison, then blinked. Out of the corner of their eyes, Naruto and Hamura glanced at each other, then just as quickly looked away when they realized the other was looking. While the fire user became a blushing mess, his face taking on the same color as his flame, Naruto coughed into his hand in an effort to regain his composure. Are you sure you two don't swing that way? Asked Uzumaki, clearly enjoying her chance to tease the blonde. Because you two seem pretty knowledgeable about each other. Says the girl whose Ashikabi also happens to be female, Naruto shot back, smiling pleasantly when he saw Uzumaki flush. And I don't swing both ways, the blonde continued. Hamura has boobs. The statement once more brought all attention to the fire user, who squawked indignantly and tried to cover his chest again. And because Hamura has boobs, that makes him at least half female, Naruto was either unaware of, or more likely, ignoring the glare the silver-haired Sekirei was sending him as he spoke. So technically, I don't swing that way. If the upper half is female, then so long as I don't do anything with the lower half, I can still be considered 100% straight. Why did I let him wing me again? Asked Hamura, his tone laced with so much sarcasm it couldn't really be called sarcasm. Uzumaki shook her head as she looked at Naruto. You have some really twisted logic, bro, she pointed out to the blonde, who merely nodded to her words. It was true, but at the moment Naruto was in denial, and everyone knows what they say about denial being the first phase of, well, anything that revolved around situations like this. Yeah, he didn't know either, but that was probably because there had never been a situation like this before, at least not one that he had heard about. Considering he was the writer of the most famous erotica novels in the world, that was saying something. Because you and Naruto-sama are connected, Usubi told the fire user, speaking in such a way that made it seem like she was disappointed Hamura hadn't figured out the reason he let himself be bound to Naruto. Apparently, the answer was obvious to Usubi, who was nodding to herself as she continued speaking. Naruto-sama was destined to be your Ashikabi because you two are connected by the power of love. That was the sound of Hamura choking on air, because apparently such a thing was actually possible when you're that surprised and or disgusted by someone else's words. Uzumaki began to pat Hamura on the back to help him unblock his throat of the origin that seemed to have gone down the wrong tube, and unashamedly snickering while she did so. Naruto also looked a tad green from Usubi's words, but he did his best to ignore them, and instead decided to start eating. After all, he didn't want all the food, and that hour and a half it had taken to make it going to waste. Phew, this is just like a soap opera. Natsu giggled her old man giggle from where she sat, her left hand going to her glasses and adjusting them, so that they reflected the light in ominous ways. Even as Naruto ate one of the onigiri shaped as his own head, he wondered if the amorous redhead knew of the effect adjusting her glasses in such a way caused. Probably. Just be quiet and eat your lunch, Natsu, Naruto said with a sigh. The excitement of making lunch seemed to have been drained out of him, now that lunch had finally strolled around, and was it just him, or were both Uzumaki and the redhead enjoying their current situation entirely too much for his liking? Phew, Natsu just giggled as she began piling some boiled shrimp and pickled vegetables onto her plate. Uzume on the other hand went straight for the onigiri. She snatched up one of the strangely shaped rice balls, and was just about to eat it, when she paused mid-bite, her eyes blinking, as she realized just what the onigiri she was about to eat was shaped as. She then took a closer look at the other rice balls, and couldn't help but snort when she saw that more than half of them were made to look like the tenants of Maison Izumo. Did you seriously spend that much effort to make the onigiri look like us, bro? She asked, holding the rice ball in her hand in front of her, so that everyone could see it. The one she was holding looked, ironically enough, like Uzume. The face was slightly heart-shaped, and it was topped with what looked like potato shavings to make it look like hair. The left side even had the shavings intricately made to look like a ponytail. It was also complete with brown eyes, and a mouth set in Uzume's signature grin. I was having fun, Naruto said with a shrug as all of the other Sekirei at the table began looking over at the onigiri. Hey, I see me in there. Usubi said as she grabbed one of the rice balls that looked nothing like a bowl. She held it out with a grin. Look, it's Usubi. She crowed cheerfully. Natsu's giggling reached its peak as she decided to find her own rice bowl, then for kicks searched for a Naruto one. Yuhu, let's begin the experimentation, she giggled perversely as she began to play with the two rice balls in her hand, by making them look like they were making out with each other. Naruto watched the red hat for a moment, before shaking his head and releasing a sigh. Maybe making onigiri in the likeness of those living in Maison Izumo hadn't been a very good idea. He could only pray Kusano didn't pick up the red hat's bad habits. Already the green girl enjoyed playing with her food far too much. Akitsu nodded as she grabbed an onigiri that looked equally like her. It's me. And here's Ku-chan. Ku-chan too. Kusano held up her own onigiri face, this one with scraggly blonde hair and green eyes. Naruto shook his head at the little sprite as he looked at the chaos he had unleashed. His eyes went over to Hamura, who was looking at his own onigiri face with a rather perturbed expression. The blonde wasn't quite sure what was going through his newest Sekirei's head, but it probably ran along the lines of the more feminine features the onigiri face had, compared to the last time he had looked in the mirror. Uzume had actually just finished her own Uzume onigiri, and had grabbed another one, this one with lavender hair and purple eyes that crinkled. Check it out, she said, holding the onigiri out for everyone to see. It's Miya. Speaking of Miya, Hamura said as he looked over at the head of the table, which was still empty. Just where's Miya? I'm right here, Kagari-san. The voice came from the entrance into the dining room, and everyone turned towards its source to see Miya entering the room with slow and careful steps. It was hard to distinguish, since the woman was covering herself admirably, but Naruto noticed that the slowness in her steps was due to fatigue more than anything else. Looking the woman over, he noticed that she had slight bags under her eyes, though they were practically unnoticeable, unless you had enhanced vision like him. There were also a few strands of hair out of place on her head, making it look like she had just woken up and forgot to brush her hair. Only Naruto and Matsu seemed to notice this, however, as the rest remained oblivious to the small distinctions in the woman's form. Check it out, Miya, Uzume said with a grin as she held out the onigiri she had grabbed a hold of. It's you. Oh my, Miya said, holding a hand to her face. Once more, the act was masterfully done, but there was a distinct lack of giggling that often accompanied it. What an interesting onigiri, the Lavenderat continued, sitting down at the end of the table opposite Matsu, before beginning the process of putting food on her plate. Bro here made them, Uzume commented, her words causing Miya to stiffen slightly. Heedless of the reaction her words caused, the busty star-shirted Sekirei took a bite out of the Miya onigiri, and almost moaned in contentment. I gotta admit this is really good, even if he made them into weird shapes, she finished with a slight leer at Naruto, who merely shrugged at the tomboy and went back to his eating. Naruto wasn't quite sure how to act around the landlady. On the one hand, he was still quite upset at her, and on the other, Miya was the proprietor of Maison Izumo. It wouldn't be a good idea to show disrespect to the woman, especially when it was more than just them. At the same time, he didn't really want to speak with her. In the end, the Eternal Shinobi decided his best option was to simply ignore her as much as possible. Miya took one of the onigiri into her hands, this one holding the spiky blonde hair of her only non-Sekirei tenant. She took a tentative bite, and almost immediately perked up. It's very good, she admitted, her eyes roving over to Naruto, who was popping shrimp into his mouth with his eyes closed, his entire posture slightly closed off. You're very talented in the kitchen, Naruto-san. The recipient of her compliment stiffened slightly, his chopsticks freezing halfway to his mouth. Such a reaction didn't even last for a second, however, and Naruto was quick to crease the rest of the distance of his mouth from his food, while also forcing his body to reel ah. "Thank you," he replied in a distant voice as he continued to eat. Mia seemed to realize Naruto wasn't in the mood to talk with her. With a sigh, and a slight slumping of her posture, the normally unassuming landlady began eating the meal that the blonde she was having so many troubles with made. Conversation after that seemed to be stifled. As more and more time passed, the residents of Maze and Izuma were able to sense the building tension between the landlady and the only Ashikabi of the boarding house. It was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Even Hamura, who had not been awake during the time that Naruto berated the Lavenderette for spying on him, was capable of sensing the problem, even if he could not quite tell what that problem was. Natsu and Uzume shared a quick glance with each other, and grimaced as they realized that while Naruto may have forgiven them, he hadn't quite forgiven Mia yet. It probably needn't be said, but neither Musubi nor Kusano were aware of the current tension surrounding the rest of the group. The littlest of Naruto's flock had just finished eating a few minutes ago, and was now in dreamland, her chin resting on the table as she slept. Musubi was simply munching away on her Naruto nigiri, humming away as she contentedly ate the hat-shaped rice bowl. Akitsu might have not noticed the tension either, busy as she was staring at her Akitsu onigiri with a blank look. Naruto still wasn't sure if she was just that absent-minded, or if she was actually more observant than everyone else thought and merely acted absent-minded. Mia, Hamura called out into the now quiet room that had, until that moment, been broken only by the soft hums of Musubi. When the landlady had jerked to the left, her eyes blinking as they focused on his, it became pretty clear to the fire user that something had happened while he was asleep. "Are you alright? You seem off." Mia actually had to take a moment to respond to Hamura's concern, which in itself could easily be taken as a sign that not all was well. "I am fine," she said, finishing her reassurance with a slight smile, when that did not crinkle her eyes like usual. Hamura frowned as his eyes went from the lavender-haired beauty to Naruto and back again. "Has something happened between you two?" he finally asked, indicating both Naruto and Mia as he got the clue of his concern. Honestly, someone would have to be daft or as air-headed as Musubi to not sense the tension that hung in the air like a thick cloud of acrid smoke. Naturally, Hamura didn't have a clue what was going on between the two that had caused so much friction between them, but from the looks on both Uzume and Matsu's face, they were well aware of what was going on. Maybe he should talk to them after lunch. "Nothing you need to be concerned about, nothing's happened between us," the two people Hamura had spoken about said in unison. Mia looked over at Naruto in surprise, while Set Blonde merely stiffened a bit, and then began trying to ignore the looks they were receiving, by going back to his meal. A frown crossed the faces of those who were in the know. The problems between the landlady and their Ashikabi, sans Uzume, who was also in the know but not one of the blonde Sekirei, was one that none of them likely knew how to deal with. As unfortunate as it was, only time would tell whether the issues that had arisen between the two would work themselves out in the end. Those living in Maze and Izumo could only pray it happened soon, and that it didn't end with the boarding house being decimated by a fight between the two. The rest of the week had passed without any serious incident. Since the issue of Hamura's violent reaction had been resolved on Wednesday, Naruto had fallen into something of a routine. Every morning he would wake up to find all of his Sekirei sans Hamura sleeping on his bed. This was neither surprising nor unwelcome, except for Kusano. All of the other Sekirei that slept with him went to bed when he did, so it wasn't like he had any right to be surprised when he woke up. Truth be told, now that he was actually trying to let his Sekirei into his heart as had been suggested to him, he would admit, even if only to himself, that he greatly enjoyed the physical contact. After laying in bed for a while, normally around half an hour, to fully wake up, Naruto would utilize a quick Hawarimi in order to replace himself with a clone. The copies wouldn't last very long, seeing as how shadow clones were not only very fragile, being made out of pure energy and all, but also that his Sekirei were very strong. Musubi in particular was quite adept at unknowingly killing off his clones when she squeezed one of them too tightly. Once freed from the comfortable confines of his Sekirei-ridden bed, Naruto would get dressed in some basic workout clothes and go outside into the back courtyard, where he would begin getting himself back into shape. So far he had not been able to do much: push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, suicide drills, shadow sparing, and few other exercises that could be done within the backyard. There was no place for him to practice his ninjutsu, nor his shuriken and kunai accuracy. Eventually Naruto would have to find a place he could practice such things in private, but at the moment he didn't need much. All he had been doing so far was getting his body back into fighting shape. His exercises would normally last around 3 hours, and generally end when Musubi and the others begin to wake up and get ready to start their day. After he finished with his workout, Naruto would make quick use of the bathhouse to clean himself off. It was usually just a quick cleaning. The blonde didn't allow himself the lure of doing anything more than washing the sweat and grime that often became attached to his body while getting back in fighting shape. It was a bit disappointing, as he had very few chances to enjoy the Japanese-style bathhouse since coming to Japan, but for the sake of regaining what he had lost, Naruto was willing to make some sacrifices. Afterwards, Naruto would go into the kitchen and begin cooking breakfast. Normally this was accompanied by the sounds of Miya and Musubi clashing against each other. Despite the problem Naruto and the landlady were having, Miya would still train his first Sekirei. By this time Akitsu and Kusano would come into the kitchen and help set the table and bring the food he made for breakfast, and after breakfast Naruto would spend time reading the profiles Natsu continued to update him with while sitting on the couch with his Sekirei as they watched television. This was how Naruto's days had run themselves since Homura's winging, and while slightly annoyed by all of the things he had to do, things that could be done with a Kage Bunshin, it weren't for the fact that he didn't want anyone who didn't already know about that technique, Musubi, to know about it. The past few days had been very productive to say the least. Already Naruto had managed to memorize the profiles of all the big-name Ashikabi, those who would prove to be the biggest threats to him and his Sekirei, and while he had not yet managed to create anything aside from basic counter strategies for 2 of the big 3, he had come up with a plan when it came to dealing with Higa. A plan that would be put into action today. I don't like it. Naruto sighed as he looked up from his android, which he had been using to scroll through Higa's profile, in order to do some last-minute checkups, and make sure he had all of the information he needed for the upcoming mission, and into the angry eyes of his new Sekirei. It had been a day since Naruto had come up with a plan to not only get Uzume's Ashikabi, a young girl named Hidaka Chiho, out of the hospital owned by Higa, but also disrupt as many of the Ashikabi of the East's plans as possible. It was a move that many people would probably consider outrageous considering who they were going against, but Naruto hadn't been known as the #1 most unpredictable ninja back during the time of the Elemental Nations for nothing. It had been a long time since he had actually planned a large-scale operation like this, but it seemed that his time off the field had not dulled his idea of thinking big. I am well aware of your dislike for my plan, the blonde responded to Homura's angry statement dryly. You've only told me about 200 times within the past hour, see 100 times for the past day, and about see 1,000 times since I told you about it. And I'll tell you another see 1,000 if that's what it takes to get it through your thick skull. Homura all but snarled. The semi-male Sekirei had been very displeased after hearing the plan his Ashikabi had crafted, and so far he'd had no problem telling the blonde shinobi how stupid he thought this plan was, repeatedly. Higa is as dangerous as they come as far as Ashikabi are concerned, the fire user continued his rant to Naruto. He's one of the few people who have managed to wing a Sekirei even when I tried protecting them. Higa's a vile, wretched, scum-ridden piece of filth that has no problem having a Sekirei beaten into submission and forcibly winged, in order to increase the number of Sekirei he has at his disposal. By this point in his speech, Homura had taken to clenching his fists so hard that his knuckles had turned white. Naruto was actually surprised his palms hadn't started to bleed when considering how deeply his nails must be driven into his skin. Don't forget that he also has no trouble using bribery, bullying, blackmail, and many other forms of coercion, in order to convince other Ashikabi to have their Sekirei do his bidding, Naruto added almost absently as he went back to looking over the profile on his phone. Homura did not seem to like the blonde's blatant dismal of the threat Higa posed, if the growl he released was anything to go by. Naruto didn't really pay attention to the noise as he continued. We should also remember that he's not afraid of blackmailing a Sekirei his Ashikabi isn't currently in the hospital he owns with some kind of terminal illness. Which is equally why you shouldn't go and meet him alone. Homura said adamantly. It was the same argument they had been having since yesterday. Naruto's plan called for him to meet with Higa without his Sekirei, seeing as how they would be busy following through on the other phase of their joint operation, and the fire user didn't like that. It could be a trap. Possibly. Probably, Naruto was actually sure that meeting with Higa may very well end up being a trap. The man was too wily not to cover all his bases, but that was just all the more reason why Naruto had to go alone. Or at least, to go without his Sekirei. Before Homura could upload his nonchalance, Naruto continued. But that's equally why I won't be going alone. The blonde touched a finger against the screen of his cell phone and began scrolling down the information presented to him on it as he continued to speak. I've already made the call to Seo. He should be here within an hour or so with Hikari and Hibiki. Hamura, his mouth had been opened in mid-berate, closed his mouth for a moment, his anger seemingly quelled. While Mia did not consider Seo to be a very dependable guy, so long as there was money involved, he would be willing to do just about anything. Just about. I still don't like it, Hamura said at last, though his tone was much calmer now than it was before. You should at least have one of your own Sekirei with you. Either me or Akitsu at least. As single digits, both Hamura and Akitsu were two of the stronger Sekirei. The only ones who could compete with were other single-digit Sekirei, of which there were only 7 of, and the only ones who could probably beat them were the Sekireis 1, 3, 4, and 5. Naruto had been told by Matsu were created without the restraints on their strength that the other Sekirei had. Naruto knew they would be able to protect him from anything Higa could throw at him easily, however. As I said already, you don't have to like it, the Eternal Shinobi repeated. Whether or not you like the plan is irrelevant. It's really the only plan that will work. From what Uzumaki said, the blonde nodded towards the busty star-shirted Sekirei, who was grinning at the scene playing out before her. Higa always has at least 3 Sekirei at the hospital guarding Chiho. Presumably, this is to protect her against potential threats from outside influence, but we all know better. It was a rather poorly fabricated lie. Anyone with a set of eyes and a brain would be able to tell that Higa's guard detail was not there to protect Uzumaki's Ashikabi, but rather to threaten the girl, so that Uzumaki would have no choice but to do as she was told. It was a very blatant way of saying do as I say, or else. Hamura knew this, even if he didn't want to admit it. Naruto knew that Hamura had to know this. From the look on the fire user's face, he was definitely struggling to come up with some kind of counter-argument. Not that Naruto was going to let him. Uzumaki will be too busy securing her Ashikabi and escaping to engage in combat, Naruto continued before his new Sekirei could get a word in. And Kusano is too young to get involved in battle right now. It wasn't just a matter of Kusano being a younger leader. While Naruto was loath to let his youngest Sekirei fight against other Sekirei due to her impressionable age, there was a lot more to it than that. The first problem was that Kusano's power was unstable. When her emotions wavered, so too did her powers, and the last thing they needed was for Tiny Blonde to turn the hospital into a forest. Not only would it complicate matters further, it would also reveal the existence of Sekirei to those who knew nothing about the Sekirei plan. At the very least, it would make the people in the hospital realize something weird was happening in Shinto-Tito. Naruto didn't give a damn about Minaka's threat, but he could at least the value in making sure that the general populace remained blissfully ignorant. The second issue with having Kusano involved in the coming battle was actually even simpler than the first problem. Kusano had the ability to make any plant within her vicinity grow at an incredible rate. She could make an entire forest sprout up from the earth within less than 24 hours. Her powers were incredibly, and honestly a little scary. However, her powers were also more of a support ability at the moment. All she could do was make plants grow, that was it. She didn't have any control over them, not what they did, or how they grew, or anything that would allow her to direct her plants in battle. Quite simply, having her out in the field right now would make her a liability. With Uzumaki incapable of fighting, and Kusano unable to get involved, you, Akitsu, and Musubi are the only Sekirei I have that can provide the necessary firepower needed for this mission to be a success. This really was the only way the plan he had crafted could work. His plan was also the one that had the biggest potential gain. Sure, Naruto could go with a simpler plan, but then they would only be able to deal with one of the problems they were facing. The blonde would much rather prefer to nip all potential problems in the bud before they grew too big. Then why can't you have Seo help Uzumaki while Akitsu and I guard you? Reasoned Hamura. He looked like he was grasping at straws now. The fire user had to know that Naruto wouldn't budge on this, so just why was he being so adamant about having himself or Akitsu there to protect him during the meeting? Because as good a potential ally as Seo is, I don't know him well enough to trust him with a task as delicate as the one I've given you, Akitsu, and Musubi, Naruto responded. Seo was sharp, perhaps even too sharp for his own good. The man knew how to keep his ears to the ground, and when paid well enough, would work his butt off to get the job done. At the same time, Seo was very rough around the edges, his girls even more so. Naruto didn't want to risk sending him and the Lightning Twins in to do a job that could very well end with them accidentally destroying the hospital and surrounding buildings. But you trust him enough to guard you? Snapped Hamura. Naruto sighed as he finally pressed a button on the top of his phone, causing it to turn black as he put it to sleep to conserve battery power. It has nothing to do with trust, Naruto said calmly. The task of guarding me has less potential to turn into a combat situation than your tasks do. I am well equipped to deal with Higa should the situation get out of hand. Having Seo and his Sekirei on standby is merely an added precaution, just in case our friend from the east has a hidden ace up his sleeve. Even if the man did have such an ace, Naruto had two, the twins and Seo, and himself. Though he would admit that he didn't want to get himself involved in combat unless it became necessary. The longer most people in the Sekirei clan went on oblivious to his own abilities, the better off he and his Sekirei would be in the long run. Uzumaki chuckled as her carefully crafted controller rotated. Well, maybe it wasn't quite so carefully crafted considering she and Matsu had been snickering into their hands since the argument over Naruto's protection began. The two of them had watched every attempt Hamiura had made to convince the blonde that he needed more protection, seeming to find some form of amusement in the fire user's overprotectiveness. It hasn't even been 3 days and Hamiura is already worried about his Ashikabi. It makes me wonder how close you are to him. Hamiura seemed to jerk back at the words directed at him by the tomboyish Sekirei. Hastening to defend himself, the fire user tried to backtrack, waving his arms back and forth in front of him as he stuttered. It's not like that. Oh? Uzumaki leered at the silver-haired Sekirei. Then what is it like? As Hamiura began to sputter and try to defend his actions, Naruto decided to ignore the rest of this particular conversation. It wasn't going to be moving anywhere from the let's see how red we can make Hamiura's face anytime soon. Instead he turned to Akitsu and Musubi, who were both sitting next to him watching television. The fist fighter was on his left, while the ice user was on his right. Both of them were close enough that their eyes were touching his. So are you two ready for this? He asked. It was more a question asked as a means to ignore the mental abuse his semi-male Sekirei was going through due to Uzumaki's taunting and Matsu's perverted giggling, but he was a little curious as well. This would, after all, only be the first mission they had gone on since the rescue of Kusano. Don't worry about me, Naruto-sama, Musubi said with cheerful confidence as she slammed a fist into her open palm. Landlady-san has been training me a lot. I won't lose to anyone. Well, it was good to see that she had so much confidence. Naruto didn't know where the fist fighter would rank in the power scale when it came to Sekirei. He only had Akitsu, Hamiura, and Uzumaki to compare her to after all. And of those three only Uzumaki had less power than she did. He supposed he could have also counted Kusano, but due to the girl's inability to truly control her power, he didn't feel the comparison would be fair. I know you won't, Naruto said as he placed his left hand on her thigh, as both a sign of affection and his own belief in her. While he had not watched her spars with Miya very often, he had occasionally managed to catch glimpses of them. Having seen her first spar against the powerful landlady, Naruto knew that Musubi was improving. It was a slow-going process, it always was for people like her, but it was also steady, and each spar he had caught sight of seemed to show marked improvements in his first Sekirei's ability. As his first Sekirei beamed at him, Naruto looked over at Akitsu, who was focusing on him as if he were the answer to the universe. And what about you, Akitsu-chan? He asked, not even batting an eyelash at the woman's blatant staring anymore. Are you ready for this? Akitsu tilted her head to the side as her mind registered his words. A second or two later she nodded, yes. That's good, I'll be counting on you, Naruto told her, causing the ice user's cheeks to turn red as she turned her head away. Resisting the urge to chuckle at the light-haired Sekirei's cute reaction, the blonde turned his head to look at the clock hanging on the wall. It was nearing 11, which meant they would have to leave within half an hour or so, if he wanted to get to the hospital in time for his meeting with Higa. Naruto stood up, the action drawing the attention of everybody in the room to him. Even Uzumaki had stopped teasing Hamiura to turn her stare on him. I'm just going to get some supplies we'll be needing for this operation, he told them. I'll be right back. That seemed to be the cue for everyone to remember just what they would be doing in a little over an hour. Uzumaki's expression suddenly became nervous, but determined as the hand of her left arm grabbed the elbow of her right. It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was thinking of. Hamiura had calmed down, and now that the busty Sekirei, his Ashikabi they were going to save, was no longer picking on him, he was no longer flustered. Instead he had a pensive look as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed under his newly developed bust, which was showing due to the fact that he was wearing his guardian Sekirei clothes. Sitting in her corner where she had watched the events of the fire user getting mercilessly picked on by Uzumi, Matsu's expression turned grim, a look that was more befitting a member of the first incarnation of the disciplined squad than her usual childish and mischievous expression. The only three people whose expression had not changed were Kitsu, who looked as she always did, Musubi, who was using a combination of excitement and confidence, and Kusano, who had been sleeping curled in like a cat in Naruto's lap but was now in Musubi's. Naruto was glad the green girl was asleep right now. He didn't want to have to explain to her why she couldn't come to help Uzumi and have her get angry at him. Those molars hurt. As he made his way out of the door, the clinking of chains alerted him that Akitsu was following. This was pretty much the standard with her. If she wasn't asleep or doing something Naruto had asked of her, she was following him dutifully, on his left, neatly 4 paces behind him. It was somewhat amusing to Naruto, especially when he thought of how her positioning reminded him of a Padawan when they were walking with their Jedi Master. He was tempted to start speaking Yoda, but unfortunately didn't think the ice user would get the reference. Walking out into the hallway, Naruto didn't get very far before he was stopped in his tracks, his posture stiffening slightly. Miya was standing in the hallway in front of the stairs, blocking his path. She was wearing her normal kimono, the traditional frilly cleaning apron she often wore when doing household chores. Her hands were clasped together in front of her, and she was standing there with a straight posture. To most people, no one would be able to tell that something was wrong with her. Naruto was not most people. He could see the signs of nervousness on her as clear as day, the slight worrying of her lower lip before she had laid eyes on him, the way her thumbs twitched, as if wanting to rub the backs of her hands. Her posture was straighter than usual, and stiff, very stiff, as if she had been standing there for a while now. All were signs of someone who was nervous. They were just less noticeable on her than they would be on anyone else. Miya's acting skills were easily on par with a world-class actor. Asama-san, he greeted the woman with stiff formality. Ever since his blow-up on her for spying on him, their relationship had taken a downward turn. No longer were they comfortable in each other's presence. There was no more friendly banter and teasing between them. Miya didn't even step into the kitchen anymore, instead allowing Naruto to make all the food in her effort to avoid him. The only time they saw each other was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and those moments were always tense. It had gotten so bad that even Musubi had begun to notice that something was going on between her two favorite people. The flinch Miya gave at his formal way of speaking was masterfully covered when she responded in kind. Naruto-san, she started with nary a quiver in her voice. Her eyes did waver a bit, however, letting him know just how nervous she truly was. Can we talk? Her eyes flickered over to Akitsu for a second, then were back on his. Alone. 2 options presented themselves to Naruto. He could snub her attempts at dialogue with the same alacrity that he had been ignoring her with, or he could accept her invitation to speak in private and see what she had to say. A part of him wanted nothing more than to commit to his first option. He really didn't want to talk to her anymore. She had broken his trust, something that he had not given to anyone in several thousand years. At the same time, there were plenty of reasons why he probably should talk to her, not the least of which is that he was living under her roof. While he had ignored her as much as possible for the past few days, he had still been respectful if a little stiff. Very well, Naruto replied, and this time the relation of her posture was visible enough that the other tenants of Maison Izumo would have been able to see it if they were here. He turned his head to look at his chain-wearing Sekirei. Akitsu-chan, in my room there's a large suitcase under my bed, could you go get it for me? Of course, Ashikabi-sama, Akitsu said without her usual pause of slowness. She cast one look at Miya, before she began walking towards the room she shared with her Ashikabi. Miya deftly stepped out of the stairway as the ice user continued moving, her gaze not leaving Naruto's. This way please, she said softly as she began walking down the hall. Naruto followed her several paces behind, his mind going over possible reasons Miya might have to speak with him. He could think of quite a few, though he had crossed some of them out as improbable. It wasn't long before the landlady had led him to her room, and once they were both inside, Miya turned to look at the blonde with an impression he had never seen on her before. Perhaps that was because, like him, the landlady of Maison Izumo was a master at hiding her true feelings. She rarely showed people anything she didn't want them to see. Well, she wasn't doing that now. Miya's emotions were currently clear as day, visible on her face in the same way they would be on a person who had no skills at masking their thoughts and feelings at all. The saying wearing your heart on your sleeve came to mind when looking at the combination of anxiety, nervousness, and steel that were blatantly obvious on the woman's face. For a long moment they just stood there. Anyone else would have probably gotten nervous by being in the presence of so much emotion, but not Naruto. Aside from the fact that he was too old to be truly bothered by others and their feelings, he was finally getting a handle on his own emotional issues. Seeing the barefaced emotions on another person didn't bother him in the slightest. And so he simply waited until Mia decided to speak. However, Mia did not talk, not at first anyways. Naruto's face affected a look of utter shock as Mia, the strongest being he had met since Uchiha Madara, knelt down on the floor and prostrated herself before him in the dog-ease position. Her action was so surprising that Naruto actually stumbled back a step in his shock. "Asama-san, what are..." "I'm sorry," Mia's words halted the blonde's mid-sentence. Anything Naruto may have said died right then, allowing the woman prostrating herself before him to continue unabated. "I have greatly wronged you. You placed your trust in me and I abused it. You kept yourself from digging into my secrets, knowing that I did not want them to be revealed to you, but I did not act in the same courtesy. I have done you great injustice, and I truly, sincerely, apologize." Upon finishing her apology, Mia waited his answer, not even getting up from her dog-ease position. For a second all Naruto could do was stare at the woman before him. That had to be the most heartfelt apology he had ever received. No one in the history of his life had actually apologized to him before, not like this anyways, and for someone of Mia's stature and power to do something like this. To actually get down on her hands and knees and bow before him with her forehead actually touching the floor, was enough that even someone who had lived for as long as the blonde had to be stupefied into shocked silence. To see a woman like Mia bowing before him so was incredibly awkward. It was also wrong. There was just something about watching this woman prostrate herself before him that was wrong. There was simply no other way to put. There was a sense of wrongness to it, and it caused a horrible pit in the center of Naruto's stomach to see a woman he considered his equal debasing herself like this in front of him. "Stand up, Mia," he said. His voice was soft, and held a slight tremor to it, that showed just how much seeing the woman do this to herself was bothering him. However, Mia did not stand, did not even move from her position. She was completely still, only the rise and fall of her shoulders and back as she breathed letting him know she had not gone and turned into a statue. It was unnerving. "Please stand up," his voice was pleading now. Naruto was beginning to feel more than just disconcerted. His discomfort was beginning to reach its peak as his emotions ran wild inside of him. He wished she would get up. He didn't want to see her like this, didn't want to see her kowtowing to him, or to anyone else. Mia was supposed to be an image of strength and power, not a young woman who was willing to show so much deference to someone else by using a position of such humility. This was too much. It was too much for Naruto to take. He couldn't stand seeing the woman doing this to herself. At the same time, he couldn't quite come up with the words necessary to bring her out of such a shameful position. His mind was on the fritz, unable to even form coherent thought as he stared at the woman with his jaw agape. It was only the ringing of the doorbell that brought Naruto out of his shock. That was probably Seo. He looked over at the door, then back at Mia. The woman still hadn't moved from her spot, not even at the sound of the door ringing. Unable to find the words to express himself, not that he would be able to speak anyways, Naruto made to turn towards the door. He couldn't be here. Watching this scene unfold before him was too much. He had to get away. Wait. It wasn't a command, it was plea. The plea caused Naruto to halt, all the muscles in his body stiffening as his mind, body, and soul warred with itself. His body twitched and moved against his will, his neck turning so he could look back at Mia. She was no longer in dog-ease, instead sitting in C-ease as she stared at him. Naruto didn't notice, busy as he was staring into a pair of eyes that just didn't belong on the beautiful woman. They were no longer the strong, unyielding eyes he had come to know, nor did they hold an ounce of the mischievousness he knew they could possess. They were vulnerable, almost impossible so, and they didn't belong there. Please forgive me. Naruto stumbled, unsure of what he should say, do, or even feel. He tried again, but the words stuck in his throat, unable to form. "I'm sorry." Mia's eyes widened as Naruto raced for the door, opening it and hurrying out as her hand reached out as if to touch him, even though he had never been within reach of her throughout the entire conversation. He never saw the look of abject sadness on Mia's face as he closed the door. Naruto stumbled down the hall for several steps, trying to get as far away from Mia's room as possible. He only managed to make it halfway between the door to the landlady's room and the entrance to Maze Izumo before collapsing into the wall. He leaned against the sturdy wooden frame as he tried to regain control over himself. His breathing was heavy, and sweat was beginning to appear on his forehead. Closing his eyes, Naruto placed his left hand on his head and dragged it down his face, as if doing so would somehow help quell the raging torrent of emotions he felt. Tried to block out the sight of Mia looking so vulnerable and helpless. Needless to say, it didn't work. Naruto-sama. Blue eyes snapping open, Naruto turned towards the source of the voice to see Musubi running towards him, with Akitsu, Hamiura, Matsu, and Kusano following. Musubi-chan. Naruto blinked, nonplussed as the fist fighter stopped in front of him. Is something wrong? Are you okay, Naruto-sama? The question surprised Naruto, so much so that for several seconds all he could do was blink. What do you mean? Asked Naruto, trying to play off their concern as nothing serious. Why wouldn't I be okay? Akitsu interrupted Musubi before she could speak, and the fist fighter and the others all turned to the ice user. You were in distress, she told the blonde, her tone belying her worry. Naruto blinked, trying to understand what she was talking about before it came to him. Of course, the bond, it was a two-way link, right? It wouldn't make sense if Naruto were the only one capable of feeling the emotions being broadcast through the bond. That was why he spent so much effort shielding his mind from his Sekirei. Just because he had to feel their emotions, didn't mean he had to broadcast his own back to them. It looks like he may have slipped. I'm sorry, Naruto apologized to the group. I'm just feeling a little nervous about the upcoming mission. He lied to them. He didn't want them worrying about his relationship with Mia, and he was sure that the Lavenderette didn't want the others to get involved either. Best to just let them remain ignorant for now. Does that mean you're thinking of having one of us protect you? Asked Hamiura, perking up as he heard his Ashikabi's words. Naruto shook his head. He had to give the fire user this much. He didn't give up easily. No, he said bluntly. I have no intention of changing the perimeters of this mission just to ensure my own protection. I'll be fine with Seo and his Sekirei guarding me, so don't worry. Hamiura frowned at once more at being told that Naruto still wasn't going to let him or Akitsu protect him. It didn't look to be sitting well with the fire user, and he seemed ready to make his displeasure known one more. Oi. Anybody in there? Come on, open up already so we can get this show on the road. Thankfully, before Hamiura could lay into Naruto again, a loud and somewhat obnoxious voice shouted from the front door. Looks like there's no more time to make a change of plans anyways, Naruto started. Akitsu, do you have the briefcase I asked for? Akitsu slowly held up a large black briefcase for everyone to see. It looked like your stereotypical black leather business case, except for the compa-looking fingerprint scanner replacing the lock. I found it under the bed, she confirmed. Excellent, Naruto said, taking the briefcase from the ice user, and beginning his walk towards the door that Seo had apparently started pounding on, as he continued to shout about how they needed to hurry up. Alright everyone, it's time to get this show on the road. As Naruto's Sekirei made to catch up with him as he began walking towards the door, the eternal shinobi began trying to get his head focused on the task at hand. It wouldn't do to get distracted by his own personal affairs during this mission. Oi. Come on. The yelling on the other end of the front door to Maze and Izumo continued as Naruto stopped in front of it and opened the door. Now that's more like it. Standing just outside of the door was Seo and his two Sekirei. The scruffy-looking man had a sardonic grin on his face as Hikari and Hibiki stood on either side of him. I was beginning to think you had forgotten about me. Sorry about that, Naruto said as he hefted the briefcase over his shoulder and walked out the door, Seo and the lightning twins moving to the side so he could do so. I was just getting something and it took a bit longer than expected to find it. I'll bet, Seo said, eyeing the briefcase before they looked back at Naruto with a fierce gleam of intelligence. Man, it's only been a week since we last saw each other, and you've already managed to wing 2 more Sekirei. As Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly, Seo's went over to look at the group that had assembled. Akitsu was standing just a few steps behind Naruto on the blonde's right, with Kusano hiding behind her as she clutched the revealing kimono-esque bottom. Hamiura and Matsu were standing back near the entrance, one attempting to look nonchalant, while the other was sitting down on her haunches, as she watched the proceedings with interest. And Musubi was standing next to Naruto, hands clasped in front of her, and pushing her breasts together in such a way that the scruffy Ashikabi's eyes were drawn to it. At least they were until his own Sekirei zapped him with lightning. Oi. Seo. Keep your eyes off other girls' chests. Hikari shouted in anger, shaking a fist in front of her face, as she glared at the smoking and twitching body of her Ashikabi. Ha! Seo sighed as he stood back up and began dusting himself off without concern. Naruto got the feeling this had happened so many times the man had become used to getting shocked on a daily basis. I just can't win with you, can I? First it's don't look at my chest, you pervert. And now it's don't look at other girls' chests, you pervert. Man, when will I get a break? What was that? Nothing. I take it you three already? Asked Naruto, interrupting the two before they could start. As interesting as it may be to watch the byplay between them, he really just wanted to get this operation started. Of course, Seo replied easily enough. He eyed the briefcase one more time, curiosity warring with nonchalance. So what's in the briefcase? Naruto's smile was cold, and those who saw it shivered a bit as they hoped to God it was never directed at them. Just a few gadgets that I think may help us in the coming mission, he replied in a tone that had the hairs on the back of Seo's neck stand up. For some reason, the scruffy Ashikabi didn't believe the blonde's words for a second. Hahaha. Great, and now the blonde was emitting a creepy laugh, while malevolent black energy radiated from his entire being. The expression on Seo's face made it clear that he was thinking what a few other people there were thinking. That perhaps siding with the blonde wasn't such a good idea. He was worse than Mia. Thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you want the next part of this video, like, subscribe and comment down below and turn on the bell notification. And also check out other videos that I have created and enjoy. See you in the next video. Peace.